Okay, Loran, I've got it recording. Destry, why don't we go ahead and get started if Mark does show up. He did tell me that he had a family event tonight and wasn't sure that he'd be able to be on, but oh, just a second. Mark's calling me on my phone. Just a second.
Okay.
Honest with ourselves as to whether or not we have COVID or not. If we do need to go forward.
On Wednesday, who did not want to give any comments other than to say, although what is going further?
All right, fair enough.
Okay, Mark was having a little bit of a difficulty getting on. He's on speakerphone here at with me. Mark, can you say something so that everybody can tell if they can hear you?
Hello, testing 1, 2, 3.
I can hear him.
Okay.
All right, we got some head nods and stuff like that, so we should be good.
Okay, so I've got 6:03. We'll call the meeting of the Urban Renewal Committee to order. And I guess we begin with Pledge of Allegiance, and I can see the flag behind your right shoulder.
Yeah, I sat just so that I'd get the flag right there.
All right. This will be awkward, but we'll do it.
Yep.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the
United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands,
one
one
nation,
nation,
under
under
God,
God,
indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, and we could call the roll of the committee members.
Okay, I have Destry Randalls,
Present.
Brett Seawright,
Present.
Paul Matthews,
Present.
Liz St. Mark,
Present.
Mark Worthen.
Present.
Okay,
Okay, and moving on to item number 4, which is an action item. And this is in 2 parts. The first one is to approve the February 5th, 2020 minutes. I'll open this up for any discussion or a motion to approve the minutes.
I've got the agenda here up on the screen too. We'll share with this so that everybody can see it. So we do have on the consent calendar both the minutes and the monthly bills as presented in the packet. So a motion to approve the consent calendar would be in order.
All right, I'll make the motion to approve the consent calendar as presented.
and who is this?
That was Brett Seawright.
Thanks.
I would second that motion.
Okay, thank you.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Was that one opposition?
No, I think Mark was just trying to get his eye in for the approval because he said aye twice.
Aye.
Okay. I thought I'd heard him one other time, so I was concerned that there was another person that we weren't aware of. The consent calendar motion carries and has been approved.
On the future one, we'll do a roll call vote. That way we make sure that we get everybody at the right time.
I think that's fair. Moving on to item number 5, which is also an action item, which is the consideration of the owner participation agreement between Rathdrum Urban Renewal Agency and Beyond Green Incorporated for the West Rathdrum Industrial Park project and adopt the resolution as such. We'll now open that for discussion and review. Leon?
Yeah, just want to let you know, this is the owner participation agreement. We've kind of looked at some draft versions at previous meetings. This is the agreement between Beyond Green and the Urban Renewal Agency that states that they will pretty much, I'll give you the summary version, then have Megan make some comments after that. This basically says that they'll put in the infrastructure up and they will get reimbursed based on the actual tax revenue that comes in, but no more than $46 million, I believe is what the amount was in the agreement. So there is a cap. It's capped two different ways, and I'm scrolling through here real quick. It's capped in two different ways. So one, it's capped the maximum amount that we would be paying out as a reimbursement, and two, in the actual tax dollars that come in. So if the tax dollars that, let's say it's up to 46 million, but if the tax dollars only come in at 20 million, then we wouldn't be paying more than what the actual tax dollars came in as. Megan, do you want to give some additional insight on this agreement?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners and Leon. So what you have before you is the owner participation agreement that is actually signed and submitted by the development group. And it was subject to a number of back and forth negotiation on some of the provisions. But I think in some, we have reached agreement on all of the pertinent terms. And so if I can, I will just kind of walk through the highlights of the agreement, as this is really the first time this board has been through this process. And of course, feel free to stop me if you have any questions. Okay. So as you recall, when actually BGI and the agency entered into the memorandum of understanding early on, the developer advance funded the planning process for creation of the district. And as part of that also, it should have taken us through the drafting of the owner participation agreement. So to the extent those costs were pre-advanced, they are going to be subject to reimbursement as part of this agreement as well. Sometimes you'll see an owner participation agreement where maybe it's just one lot out of the whole project area, but this agreement or this project area was really stood up with one owner, understanding that the full thing was going to be developed by the owner. And so for this, there really is no distinction between the site and the project area for purposes of this agreement. So the recital section of the owner participation agreement really just provides guidance on how we got to where we're at, and what the site is, what the plan is, and that it's anticipated that the development group will be specifically entering into certain development agreements with the city that it will have to do in order to develop its site in any event. And then moving down into the agreement section, section 1 and 2 are fairly boilerplate in terms of scope. It provides some definition. It provides also a reference to what the map of the site is and the legal description. It talks about specifically defining who is the agency, who is the participant. And in subsection, in letter G1 on page 4, we're talking about what the private development is. And the private development is what BGI and or its partners are going to come in and develop on the site, which is anticipated to increase the overall taxable value of that site. Now, as part of the and then below that on page 5, you have the city agreements and approvals. And so that's just also a reminder to everybody that, yes, we have this reimbursement agreement with the development group, but there's also these other city agreements and approvals that are out there. And the agency really isn't in the business of determining, whether the road complies with the city and or county requirements. That really is a city job. So kind of just setting up that any development that occurs on the site, and this is consistent with the plan, is going to have to be consistent with whatever the city development requirements are. So moving down at the bottom of page 5, subsection D is where we first introduced the agency-funded public improvements. And these are really identified in the plan as there was a reasonable potential scope of development identified in the plan. And as part of those development scenarios, there's a number of public improvements that were identified and were also quantified in terms of potential costs. And those are potential public improvements that would potentially be reimbursable at a later date. And so those projects identified in the plan really form the basis for what we're doing in this owner participation agreement. These dollars are not directly going to go into, say, the brick and mortar of the private development, but are going to be used for the public infrastructure that will assist and promote the economic development that is anticipated to occur in this project area. Page 6, F, is the reimbursement obligation. So in 1, we identify what the amount of the reimbursement is. And this $46,117,000, that is the estimated cost, total cost of any and all agency-funded public improvements. And these are this number was pulled from the plan. And again, this has been structured from the beginning as a developer-funded project. So it's anticipated that the public improvements will be funded by the development group and then thereafter subject to reimbursement. So as part of this in 2, the notification, inspection, and approval, it sets forth or attempts to identify what information will really need to be submitted to the agency and ultimately reviewed likely by city engineer and signed off on. And so we want to make sure that, whatever documentation is needed to confirm that this was constructed in a commercially reasonable manner and is consistent with the pricing that's out there, we've tried to identify what that may look like in terms of a submission in this agreement. And then there are a certain number of timelines where the agency has to respond if it believes that some of the costs aren't eligible. And Leon talked about a cap. It's also capped by purpose of, or by function of, we're only reimbursing the actual eligible cost. So we may estimate an infrastructure improvement of $100,000, say, for a sidewalk. But if it only comes in at $20,000, then the agency would only be reimbursing up to the $20,000, not what the estimated value is. It does go the other way, though. If it ends up coming in higher, $120,000, then if it's an actual eligible cost and it's reasonable and it's commercially reasonable and it's consistent with the plan, then there is potential for reimbursement for the total cost. But we really are looking at the actual eligible cost here. Ultimately, the agency really does have discretion as to what that actual eligible cost is. So if we keep scrolling down to page 9, this is where the reimbursement procedure is set forth in paragraph G. And there's essentially 2 triggers to the reimbursement that we're talking about here. And the goal is that we're not reimbursing a project that's in progress, but rather we're reimbursing for a completed asset. And so, for example, let's say a building has the first certificate of occupancy and we've got some public infrastructure related to that building, or the city's acceptance of the approval that was constructed. So for example, let's say they've redone a stretch of the road and that has been completed and the city's looked at it and it's done. So that's the first half of the equation, is what is triggering the reimbursement obligation. The second half is sort of set forth below that is, and this is actually consistent with the projections in the plan. So it's 80% of the revenue allocation funds that are actually received by the agency are then available to pay for these actual eligible costs. So if there's no money coming in, then there is no reimbursement obligation, even if the trigger has been satisfied. If there's no money, there's no reimbursement. Further in the agreement, it discusses that, and it really serves as a reminder that the agency really doesn't play a role in the budget and levy setting process or in the tax collection process. So the money it gets is the money that it gets, and that it has been allocated to it by the county as a function of the statute. There are some indemnification provisions in here starting on page 11. And that is, to the extent there is work being performed on the site and the agency is brought into some litigation related thereto, there is this provision that requires the participant to indemnify the agency. There's another provision in there that talks about, to the extent this agreement is challenged for some reason, there's a participant has agreed to indemnify and hold harmless and defend the agency. There are some insurance requirements therein just to, provide some safety. And as you recall, this is a 20-year plan under the statute. And, to the extent development occurs rapidly and there is the ability to reimburse more quickly, there's nothing in this agreement necessarily that would preclude the agency from terminating the district early. However, to the extent there are some delays, this agreement can be in effect to December 31st, 2039, or until it's fully paid. And so that really is the nuts and the bolts of this agreement. The rest is fairly standard boilerplate contract language. So there are 4 attachments to this exhibit. There's the map of the site, the legal, and then attachment 3 has taken the information that was provided in the plan and attempted to put those in certain categories on what the anticipated eligible reimbursable costs are going to be in that area. And then there's attachment 4, which is the confirmation of agency reimbursement. We recognize that this may be developed in phases and that not all of these projects are potentially going to be reimbursed all at one time. And so what this confirmation of agency reimbursement is, once a project has been completed and the evidence has been provided to the agency for review and sign off, and the parties have agreed to a number on what the actual eligible cost is, it'll be memorialized in this, and then that will sort of serve, and we can do multiple confirmations as projects are completed, and they're just paid off by the earliest number gets paid off first, and you work your way through them. So this hopefully will assist with tracking improvements over this long period of time and depending on when they come online. So, with that, I'm happy to stand for questions. There is a resolution in your packet, 2020-01. Let me get back up there in my version. So this does provide that, or it authorizes the chair to sign off on this agreement. The recitals in the resolution are images of what is actually in the OPA itself. And then in the resolution, it identifies the OPAs attached here to as Exhibit A. And then in Section 3, gives the chair, vice chair, and secretary the authority to sign and enter into the OPA. And then Section 4, that this resolution shall be in full force and effect immediately thereafter. So I think, to the extent the board considers this agreement and signs off on it, this does put the project in a pretty good standing to be able to give some comfort to the developers that they can immediately start pursuing their economic development projects on the site. So sorry for the length of the discussion, but I know this is the first time that we have been through this.
There we go. So members of the board, it's up then for you guys to either ask questions, discussion, or a motion to approve the resolution.
And I reviewed it earlier, and based on the explanations from Megan, I have no questions, but would certainly leave it open for anybody else if there were any questions.
Chairman, if you don't mind, I'll just kind of go down through the list of all of our members to make sure that since we're on a Zoom meeting, to make sure that we've got everybody an opportunity to make a comment. So I'll start with Mark, since he's on the phone. Mark, do you have any questions or concerns about the agreement?
No, the only question I have is it seems with that the number seems pretty big, and I'm wondering, is this kind of is this set up in a way? I know it's not meant to be, but it seems like all the advantages are to the developer. In other words, if developers' prices are a little higher, they fit within that large number. I could be totally wrong on that. It just seems like there may be some ways for the developer to pad his profits just a little bit, but I could be totally wrong in that manner.
Well, one of the things that we do have as a safeguard is it has to go through the city engineer. So we'll be looking at these numbers and making sure that the costs are in line with the city projects. And I believe, Megan, please let me know, even because these are public infrastructure things, they still have to be bid accordingly. Megan?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, it's on mute. Leon, I think in order for them to really be 100% sure that what they're doing is commercially reasonable, they do need to comply with the public procurement bidding requirements. And I believe that is what has been relayed to the development group. And it is a big number. I do think what we've tried to do is build in enough safeguards in here that, really the developer is going to be out the money first. And with the way that assessed valuations work, it could be several years before they actually start seeing a return on their investment. And it's only to the extent that the taxes are being paid and that those end up in the agency accounts, and the agency retains 15%, and 85% is available to reimburse those actual eligible costs. So if the 20-year period runs out and it hasn't been fully reimbursed, and the developer is not going to be able to get any more than what he's received.
All right. Well, with those safeguards, that satisfies my question.
Okay. Okay, next on my scrolling list of video people is Liz. Do you have any questions, Liz?
No, I don't have any questions.
Okay. Paul, you're next.
Yeah, thank you, Megan, for a very thorough presentation there. I don't really have any questions other than I had maybe a curious question. There are some safeguards or some almost like kill switches for paying some of the reimbursement requests, but is there anything that pushes the developer to make a reimbursement request? I mean, in theory, he could request no reimbursement, or I mean, presumably he would wait until there's sufficient revenues generated that his reimbursement request would be paid. But I guess it seems like there's safeguards in there that are really more geared towards the timing of things. And I was just wondering on his end, if there's anything that requires him to request a reimbursement at this time rather than later, other than it would be in his interest, presumably, to get money sooner rather than later. Does that make sense?
Yep. Paul,
Yeah.
go ahead, Megan.
Oh, thank you. No, that's a great question. And I think part what drives the process really is the fact that this project area is really only live for 20 years. And when you take in the fact that we have a delayed process in terms of assessment and actually receipt of revenues, that shortens the period even more. So to the extent the developer would like to maximize any benefit that they may have under use of revenue allocation funds, it is incentivizing them to probably move more quickly. But no, there's nothing in here that mandates you have to start construction by X date. That was not built into this agreement, no.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
And Lance, I
Brett.
don't know if you can comment on the fact that, you know, they're actively looking to activate this area.
I was thinking that after we finish up this, I'll give them an update on what's actually going on with the property and where things are progressing. Brett, do you have any questions, concerns?
Nope, no questions or comments here.
Okay. Mr. Chair, it looks like we're gone through the group and up for possible motion.
At this time, Leon, I would make a motion that we adopt resolution 2020-001, which is titled "A Resolution of the Board of Commissioners of the Urban Renewal Agency of Rathdrum, Idaho, authorizing agency to enter into an owner participation agreement with Beyond Green Incorporated, authorizing the chair or vice chair and the secretary of agency to take appropriate action, and providing for this resolution to be effective upon its passage and approval."
I'll second that.
And we should probably take a roll call vote.
And let me find Loran here because I think I muted her. There we go. All right, Loran, you're unmuted.
Okay, so Destry Randalls,
Yes.
Liz St. Mark,
Yes.
Paul Matthews,
Yes.
Brett Seawright,
Yes.
Mark Worthen,
Yes.
And the motion carries with unanimous vote, and the resolution is adopted.
Okay, and then I'll work with Destry to get signatures on these documents. I do want to just give you an update on the projects going on before we adjourned. This isn't really up for conversation or discussion, but because it's not on the agenda, but just thought I'd give you guys an update. There is a project that is looking at the 115 acres, what we've called the Graff property. That's the area south of Lancaster. It's called Project Emerald. Still, you know, the name of the company and everything that they do and things like that is still top secret. We don't even know what that is yet, but the developers are working with them to see if this is a good fit. We happen to be one of, I think, 2 different locations that they're considering. So it's not a done deal, but we do know that this would bring new jobs into the area. And they are looking at filling the entire industrial area of that 115 acres. So we wouldn't see a bunch of little projects going out through the entire area. But if they do select this as their location, they would take the full industrial zoned areas within that 115 acres. So that's good news. One other thing that they have mentioned is that they want to be up and running in 18 months from today. So yeah, that I saw Paul's head bob there. If his hand wasn't covering his mouth, I'm sure it would have dropped all the way to the floor. But yes, so they are looking at getting going quite soon. So this will be a big help to have this approved and signed and ready to go. And they can start to move forward and use this as an incentive to bring that company to Rathdrum. As we get more information, of course, I will share that with you guys as we get it. But that's it.
No further items on the agenda, no additional discussion being made. I will adjourn the meeting at 6:33.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye. Thanks,
good
everybody.
Bye.